Hey there, it's Jody. I host the show that you're listening to right now, which has been going for 5 years and is gearing up for its biggest year ever next year as we head towards America 250. And I'm here to tell you that we are only able to do this and grow and be ambitious at a time when public media and radio and podcasting are in a really tough spot. We've only been able to do this because we are part of the Radiotopia community. And more specifically, because listeners to this show and other shows in the Radiotopia Collective have stepped up to become members and supported Radiotopia directly. Being a part of Radiotopia means not just that we get some support from Radiotopia, but also that we are in community with other hosts and shows who I deeply respect and admire, like Nate DeMeo of The Memory Palace, Rishi Hirway of Song Exploder, the great Avery Trufelman of Articles of Interest, not to mention all the new incredible shows like Try Hard and Proxy. These are some of the best radio makers in the world, and we're all in it together. This community spirit also extends to the fundraiser itself. We split the money that is raised during our annual fundraiser, which is where you come in. Your generous gifts don't just support our team, but they cast a vote for this kind of media. Independent, plucky, ambitious, which, by the way, is how I describe you. Yeah, you. Independent, plucky, ambitious. Doesn't that sound nice? It would mean so much if you invest in our community of creators by making your tax-deductible donation very easy at our website, thisdaypod.com. And two more important things. As a bonus, when you donate before the end of the year, December 31st, your gift is going to be matched by a generous PRX donor. So double your impact right now. Also, when you donate, you will be invited to our holiday mixtope on December 4th, where all the producers, we're all going to get together and share these little audio love letters to each other, and you'll be able to listen in and join in on the community. It's going to be a really great event. We're very excited to try it, but it only works if a bunch of people like you contribute and join in. So head over to thisdaypod.com. You will see a link right there. That's thisdaypod.com to support Radiotopia. You are a huge part of this community. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, folks, we are reaching the end of the year, which means that if you are anything like me, you might be letting the spending go a little bit. Between holiday shopping and travel and parties and end-of-year donations, it can be easy to lose track of how much you're spending, what you're spending it on, and the overall state of your financial picture. Well, if you want to keep your finances under control this holiday season, you need to be using Monarch. Rated Wall Street Journal's best budgeting app of 2025, Monarch is the all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean interface on your laptop or your phone. I've been using Monarch for a few months now, and for the first time in maybe ever, I feel like I have a real sense of how the money in my life is flowing, which, as I head into a new year, is going to really help me make some smart choices. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code THISDAY at monarch.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarch.com with code THISDAY.
This show is supported by Odoo. When you buy business software from lots of vendors, the costs add up and it gets complicated and confusing. Odoo solves this. It's a single company that sells a suite of enterprise apps that handles everything from accounting to inventory to sales. Odoo is all connected on a single platform in a simple and affordable way. You can save money without missing out on the features you need. Check out Odoo at odoo.com. That's odoo.com.
Hello and welcome to This Day, a history show from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, December 1922, the Supreme Court of the United States has just issued a definitive ruling on a hot-button topic that has been roiling the country for the better part of 2 decades: mandatory vaccine requirements. Zucht v. King upheld a vaccination requirement in schools in San Antonio, Texas. It reinforced another Supreme Court ruling from about a generation earlier about vaccination requirements in Massachusetts. But the story of vaccinations in the first decades of the 20th century was not just one of legal battles. It was as much about culture and local politics, not to mention distrust of science and government. And on that front, this story is one of anti-vaccine success as much as anything, despite those losses at the Supreme Court. So, As we head towards America 250, we're marking the semi-quincentennial in 2026. We're starting to think about the stories that shaped 250 years of the United States, and this is definitely one of them. The push and pull between scientific progress and opposition to vaccines. Obviously, we are still living through that story, but it is very instructive to go back and see the contours of this fight as it played out 100 years ago. We're going to do it in 2 parts, and I'm joined, as always, by Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kelly Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
So yeah, as I mentioned, we're going to do this in 2 parts. The first, we're going to look at the arrival of vaccines and early vaccine skepticism. And then we're going to talk about the legal fights over vaccine mandates. And then in part 2, I'm really fascinated by the way in which opposition to vaccines shifted from the legal arena to the cultural and political arena, where seemingly it got a lot more traction, and the kind of traction that we are still grappling with today. So that is the roadmap. But let's start in. Why don't we start this 2-parter with me making every scientist in the audience roll their eyes, because I'm going to try and explain early vaccine science and probably screw it up. But early vaccine.
We believe in you, Jody.
Yeah.
So look, I think people know infectious disease was just like massively detrimental and dangerous in this country. In the 1600s, smallpox was the biggest natural killer in Massachusetts. It killed 1/3 of the people who got it. The late 1700s is where vaccine science really comes into the fore. There is an Englishman named Edward Jenner who tests the first smallpox vaccine. He observed that milkmaids who had contracted cowpox, a mild infection, were immune then to smallpox, a much more serious disease, which got this idea in his head that maybe a milder version of a disease can protect you from a more serious version of the disease. And then it got really gross in terms of how he started to test this. Okay.
It starts off like you lay out the idea, wow, okay, you got cowpox, and then it turns into it protects you from smallpox. Totally on board. Not on board with
Do you want to take the lead on describing how disgusting it is?
Look. Jenner takes material from a blister. So you know what material from a blister means. He gets the gunk outside of a blister of cowpox, and then he inoculates it into another person's skin. So he takes blister gunk, he puts it under your skin, and he's like, let's see what happens.
Oh, God.
But not just puts it under your skin. I mean, just think about what that means. That means they score the other person's skin and then sort of like slide a infected pustule
inside their lymph
skin.
nodes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, there's some. It's a little whatever.
I'm not gonna lie. I would not be signing up for anything.
Well, you and about I'd say 1/3 of the population of the colonies. But no. The term though, vaccine and vaccination, are derived from variolae vaccinae, which is the pustules of the cow. So there you go. The vaccine is the pustule. It is gross.
It is gross. I will say I've already slipped this into casual conversation. The Spanish word for cow is vaca.
Yeah.
And I'm like, do you know why vaccines are called vaccines? And then you get to give a little trivia about
and then your friends are like, why are we talking about pustules?
Interestingly, that is how the conversation went. Yeah. So
there you go.
And use it at your own peril.
So not long after, or let's cut maybe to the 19th century, and then obviously this is a 20th century story. But in England and then in the United States, very quickly people realize the public health benefits of this, but they also start to grapple with some of the nuts and bolts questions of, okay, we want people to do this. How do we enforce that? And now we start to get some of these early fights over mandates and skepticism.
Yeah, those two really emerge side by side. As you get vaccine mandates, you get this anti-vaccination campaign against those mandates. It seems like this vaccine skepticism or anti-vaccination movement starts in England when England puts in place mandatory vaccination for infants in 1853. And in a lot of ways, it's not that hard to wrap your mind around that, right? You're asking for babies to get vaccinations, which is this new technology. The person who helps bring the movement to the U.S. is a man named William Tebb. William Tebb looks exactly what you would imagine an old white guy from the 19th century to look like, I think. Like white hair, just like he has that stony face that 19th century white guys have. He's actually kind of fascinating despite his unremarkable appearance. He is one of those people who's just like very eclectic in their beliefs, where like hodgepodges a bunch of stuff together. He's pro-abolition of slavery. He's pro-women's suffrage.
We love it.
He's pro-vegetarianism.
Okay.
He's pro.
Maybe.
And I think we can all get behind this. Like preventing premature burial.
He's obsessed, but not... It's not an uncommon obsession at that time, but he is obsessed with preventing premature burial.
What is premature burial? Because I'm like...
Being buried alive.
And, but like the accidental burying, I mean, this is where this is the era where like coffins had those little bells. And
this is why you had a wake, yeah.
Yeah, but exactly. And this was one of his obsessions too. He would come up with techniques to measure whether someone was actually alive, but then also like coffin technology for people to alert if they had been buried alive.
Yikes.
He's a real Renaissance man, I suppose.
Yeah. Very interested in both the living and the dead because like many 19th century folks, he was also a spiritualist. Mm-hmm. So he just wanted to make sure those souls were crossing over before they got thrown into
the veil
grave.
was a little thicker, yes.
He also went to court a lot because he refused to vaccinate his daughter. He was prosecuted and fined 13 times. It comes to the United States and imports these ideas where the idea of mandatory vaccination was starting to take off in the 1850s. Massachusetts becomes the first state to require children to have a smallpox vaccine before going to school. But it takes like 20 years or so for a real anti-vaccination movement to take hold in the U.S. It's after the Civil War. You start to get anti-vaccine literature, clubs, the Anti-Vaccination Society of America forms, TEB chairs the first meeting, and it just takes off across New England and New York City. And you get all of these new arguments developed for why vaccines aren't safe.
Yeah. I was kind of shocked by learning all this because, Frederick Douglass was mentioned as like a early sort of anti-vaccine or someone who's skeptical, I would say, of vaccines. And I was kind of like, Frederick Douglass? But, I also think that you kind of have to understand these things within the context in which people are, being given information. As someone who was formerly enslaved, he was probably incredibly skeptical of anyone who was coming at him with some sort of, new technology because they often experimented on enslaved people. And so it's understandable within a context for sure.
There was also this anti-vaccinationist doctor, J.F. Banton, who warned that vaccines could introduce what he called bioplasm into the bloodstream. This is cowpox being introduced into your bloodstream, and he warned that it would carry with it, quote, all the vices, passions, and diseases of the cow.
Yeah.
Now, I love this because I know what the diseases of a cow are.
The passions?
But I really want to know its vices and passions. Like, what are cows, super into?
It's an overeater.
I feel like they're,
4 stomachs, not great. Gluttony.
I feel like for some reason I'm just thinking of The Far Side as the cartoon is the closest I've ever come to understanding the vices and passions of a cow. But yes, and then there were, the similarities to some of the fights we're seeing now are so clear. But, there were doctors, there was a Dr. Emmanuel Pfeiffer who tried to downplay the severity of smallpox, and he visited a hospital where people with smallpox were being quarantined on Gallup's Island in Boston Harbor. What happens? He gets the virus, he almost dies, but then he gets healthy and continues to oppose vaccination mandates. And so, look, this is the big swirling idea that I think we'll continue to touch on and we'll build to and talk about in the context of today, of course. But, what is your sense for both of you as we lay out this early history? What is the animating concern? Is it a health concern, a scientific concern, or is it more in the personal liberty realm? Because obviously they're all mixing, but I'm kind of trying to figure out what is the entry point in these early years for people.
It's a good question.
I think a lot of it is you have this new technology, and that's basically what vaccines are. They're a new technology, but they're different than introducing radios or whatever to somebody's home because it goes into your body. Yeah. And so I think that both heightens people's fear and suspicion. This is something, especially in a time when people don't really understand germ theory, you're going to put that into my body. That feels terrifying. I don't have a choice. That feels even worse. And I actually think that's what feeds the personal liberty argument is the state should have a limit. And the limit should be the barrier of my skin.
I kind of think it's I agree with that totally. But I also think that it's cultural, meaning like when I think of the West in particular, I think we have so ingrained in our identity this liberty and freedom and rugged individualism that when it comes to thinking about the collective or when it comes to thinking about the good of the community, people are kind of like, I'm kind of out for myself. And so like, people have, when you look around the world, that idea of communalism is much more widely accepted than it is in the West, where people don't necessarily put their neighbor or the neighborhood and the priorities of the neighborhood or community above themselves. They prioritize their own, themselves, but also their family members as well will take precedent over the collective.
Yeah.
Just to add one more layer to this, the 19th century in particular is a time before the professionalization of medicine and before there's like licensing and things like that. So people's experience with healthcare is going to vary wildly. And a lot of it is going to be built on communities of trust. Like, do your neighbors trust this person? It's based on folklore. It's based on tradition and superstition. And if you have a bad experience with a doctor, it can make you
that part,
not like old Dr. Sawbones, who, by the way, also didn't understand germ theory until relatively late in the game. So it's just as likely to kill you as to save your life. There's it's a developing
multitude
field
of sin that can be covered by washing your hands. That I also think.
Which I also feel like we relearned in COVID, when it turns out like adult Americans didn't know how to wash their hands.
Yeah.
We had to be told. It's amazing.
So look, obviously all those are swirling. I will say one other thing that it just consistently comes up, and then we'll get back to the kind of narrative here, but is kids, and so often a lot of the stories
100%.
of the individuals who are kind of in a key part of this narrative we're laying out here, a lot of them have had kids who, caught a disease and then they blamed it on a vaccine or had just a traumatic experience, and it warps warps and shapes the way that you see things when it happens to a kid, I think, in many ways.
Totally.
Hello, this is Matt from the Explorers Podcast. I want to invite you to join me on the voyages and journeys of the most famous explorers in the history of the world. These are the thrilling and captivating stories of Magellan, Shackleton, Lewis and Clark, and so many other famous and not so famous adventurers from throughout history. Go to explorerspodcast.com or just look us up on your podcast app. That's the Explorers Podcast.
All right, folks, I think we might be starting to get into holiday gift-giving panic mode. The calendar is ticking by, you're staring at that list and can't think of what to get people. Well, I've got a tip for you. When it comes to holiday gifts, I always turn to beautiful, timeless pieces of clothing and accessories that I know the person I'm giving it to will wear for years. And that is why I've been turning to Quince. I picked up a Mongolian cashmere sweater there for my sister. I mean, who doesn't love a nice new sweater? Over in the accessories section, I grabbed a really classy leather travel pouch set for a friend of mine, $60. Please don't tell them, by the way. It's a surprise. And of course, as I'm cruising around, I can't help but pick up a new pair of wool pants for myself. The items are incredible, they're luxury, they're affordable. Find gifts so good that you will want to keep them with Quince. Go to quince.com/thisday for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/thisday to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/thisday. So we are starting to get into the thick of the holiday season, and while I love the holidays, I also know that it's a really tricky time to try and eat healthy. The sweets, the baked goods, the holiday parties, the family dinners. I have a theory that the window for bad eating actually goes from like Halloween through to the Super Bowl or maybe even Valentine's Day. It can just be a really tough stretch. Which is why, when I have a chance to actually cook at home for myself and my family, I really want something healthy, seasonal, full of vegetables and great flavors. And HelloFresh does the trick. They are the #1 meal kit in America, making home cooking easier with chef-crafted recipes and fresh ingredients delivered straight to your door. And they've recently taken things to the next level, doubling their menu, packing it with healthy, high-protein recipes from all over the globe. If you cook at home with HelloFresh, you just might forget that you ate all that junk at those last 5 holiday parties. The best way to cook just got better. Go to HelloFresh.com/thisday10FM now to get 10 free meals and a free item for life, 1 per box with active subscription. Free meals applied as discount on the first box. New subscribers only. Varies by plan. Once again, that's HelloFresh.com/thisday10FM to get 10 free meals and a free item for life. A lot of this really goes to kind of the next level, and I think particularly, Kelly, your point about the personal freedom, individual liberty, this kind of thing we have in our DNA to be skeptical of government overreach. That really seems to kind of coalesce this conversation, especially as we head into the turn of the century in the early 1900s, and especially in Cambridge, Massachusetts, your neck of the woods. There is a huge fight there over a vaccine mandate.
A massive fight. And part of that, when you talk about overreach, I mean, my gosh, Cambridge, like they had mandated that all residents get vaccinated. Okay, fair enough. But what they had were these virus squads that would go throughout the city vaccinating people. And these virus squads were known to be kind of violent, really forceful. I mean, they would tackle people, they would, hit them over the head, they would pin them down, they would get the police involved to pin them down. And if you can imagine, someone sitting on top of you trying to stab you with a needle or trying to vaccinate you, I mean, that kind of image, whether you are the person who's receiving that kind of violence or you are watching that kind of violence play out, does not go over well for the community. And people are seeing these virus squads and they're absolutely terrified about what will happen to them if they choose not to vaccinate. And so there's this one Cambridge resident by the name of Henning Jacobson. He's a Swedish immigrant. He's a Lutheran pastor, and he is refusing to get vaccinated on the grounds that the laws violate, his own body and how he believes he knows how to best take care of himself. And it's interesting. He basically sues and takes it to court. He could have just paid the penalty. The fine was $5. But then again, when you think about the fact that $5 was like $200 today, I don't know if I would want to pay $200.
But it doesn't seem like it's about the money.
Oh, no, it's not. It's the principle. It's absolutely about the principle. You could also be thrown into prison. I mean, there were some stiff fines here, penalties here. So he takes this case to court, and he loses his battle, and he appeals. And it actually goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. And this is where you get like monumental change, not just in the state of Massachusetts, but sort of federally or nationwide. You've got a legal precedent to say that states can now mandate vaccines and that people have to comply or risk paying fines or being in prison.
And this is all happening at a major turning point in U.S. political history, U.S. legal history. We talked about the rise of sewer socialism, that there was this movement that was coalescing that was more communalist, that suggested that government had a more active role to play in people's lives. Public health had been a big part of that movement, as we talked about. And public health was in some ways an entering wedge for this because, this is happening at the same time that the Pure Food and Drug Act is going into effect. There's this idea that the government needs to be involved in protecting people's health. It's not unrelated to the ideas behind germ theory because there had been this older idea that the individual was responsible for illness, right? Your humors were out of whack. There was something inside of you that was wrong. And so it was treated on this individual basis. But germ theory was like, this is something that's affecting the entire community.
We're all connected.
And to protect one person, we have to kind of protect everyone. And that's a very progressive era kind of idea.
Yeah.
I mean, I love thinking about maybe because we just recently did the episodes about the sewer socialists, but I feel like the way, and Milwaukee, which was the sort of hub of a lot of these successful socialists in the teens and the 20s, it had seen riots over health mandates in the 1890s and just sort of the years before they then turned to sewer socialism. But it makes you realize that like the two things that are sort of salient in the sewer socialism conversation. One is just public health itself, we're going to make people healthier. And then the other, as you said, Nikki, is like social cohesion. And it's actually that second one that really undergirds everything, right?
Yeah.
And you can clean up the sewers and you can put out parks and so forth, but what you're really doing is you're telling a story about how our health is collectively tied together. And without that, as we see time and time again throughout this story, it can easily be, things can fall apart. A wedge can be driven and so forth.
But I think there's also something to like saying this is for the good of the community. Yeah. And when you say we're going to penalize you and that penalty is going to be forceful and harmful. I mean, like there was a health commissioner's like, if I got to crack skulls, if I got to break heads. And it's like, whoa, no, like
that's not great.
That's not great, And when people are seeing children ripped out of their parents' arms, in order to be inoculated, or children are taken away from their parents and put into these, isolation hospitals called pest houses, all of the harsh, strict, violent forcefulness of the mandate, I think is also what causes this backlash to happen, because it wasn't like, okay, you don't want to do it, fine, pay a fine. It's like, no, if you don't want to do this, we're cracking skulls.
I think it's right to highlight the downside of this, because there is a way to talk about it in these very glowing terms of we're putting the community ahead of individual selfishness. And when John Marshall Harlan, the Supreme Court justice, delivers the majority decision, he says basically that personal liberties can be suspended when the general's public safety is at risk. And that sounds right. That sounds good. But you're also talking like you're 10 years before World War I, when the government's power is going to be used to silence dissent, when it's going to be used to force people to do all kinds of things. And you're not that far out. You're maybe 20 years out from Buck v. Bell, where the government says that the state can forcibly sterilize people because they're bad for society, because they're not smart enough, or because there's something wrong with them. And that dark side is always lurking in these debates about progressives and health.
I mean, it's a vicious cycle, right? Because the government feels a need to penalize at a higher level when there isn't that sort of level of trust and when people aren't complying. But, I also... I'm not trying to minimize the dark side, but I do think like some of these things that have been received and perceived as tyranny might not have been perceived or received that way if there was more social cohesion, more trust, and so forth. So it's all just about the larger cultural context.
Yeah,
and we'll see.
People are being demonized for their class largely. I mean, like if you're wealthy, you can just pay the fine, opt out, whatever. But if you're poor, you're also being demonized as, oh, you're poor, you're impoverished, you're dirty, you are expendable. And so the treatment is going to be a lot more harsh to someone who's an immigrant or to someone who is a lower socioeconomic status, or has, some sort of stigma already attached to their identity.
Yeah.
I actually think that social cohesion point helps us to understand Frederick Douglass, right? Like, if Frederick Douglass's experiences had been different, maybe he wouldn't have questioned so much the role of the state. But he'd been on the blunt side of it.
So, Nikki, you hinted at it, but we have these kind of legal battles is where a lot of this is playing out. And particularly this case in Massachusetts, it does make its way all the way up to the Supreme Court. As you pointed out, the Supreme Court backs up the mandate. We're going to kind of end part one here, but I'm curious, if you feel like the Supreme Court taking this stance, it does feel like a little bit of a leading indicator for the era of social progressivism that would come next, right? You can kind of read it as them seeing and framing things in a kind of era of increasing, though fleeting, social cohesion.
Yeah, I mean, this is still a court that is promoting freedom of contract. We're in the Lochner era, so if we're talking about things in the field of labor and economic, it's not exactly a progressive court or one that's interested in communitarianism. But in this case, you do see that some of those progressive impulses are making their way even into one of the most conservative institutions in the country, and that suggests how big the progressive era is going to be.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, with that legal ruling, I think we're going to leave it there for part one. The Supreme Court has weighed in. This kind of earliest chapter of opposition to vaccines has run into this big legal roadblock. But that is just the beginning of this fight, because in part two, we're going to shift from the legal sphere to local legislatures, to politics, to culture. And I think a lot of people who were fighting against vaccines and vaccine mandates realized that that was the place where they were going to find purchase. And of course, that fight would crest in the first decades of the 20th century and then meet head on the influenza outbreak of 1918 and into the 20s. Bad timing, but we will get into all of that next episode. Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kelly Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
This Day is a proud member of Radiotopia, a network of independent, artist-produced podcasts. Don't forget to sign up for our America 250 Watch newsletter. Every Thursday, members get exclusive access to analysis and information about the upcoming semi-quincentennial, commentary from our team, and a list of fascinating things that happened that week throughout history. Join in, find out lots more at thisdaypod.com. You can also follow This Day Pod on Instagram, Blue Sky, and YouTube. Jacob Feldman is our researcher. Brittany Brown is our editor. My name is Jody Avirgan. See you soon.
Radiotopia.